Hi everyone. This video lesson is about aging population, and specifically we need to deal with the question of what are the consequences of an aging population. Now, you don't need to have necessarily a specific case study example but of one country, but it is important that you do have examples drawn from your wider awareness of countries around the world. So you could use examples from Britain and Japan and Germany. You can pick and choose. But as always, it's really important that we focus on specific examples to make our answers even stronger. So first of all, we need to understand what an aging population is. Then we will look at what some of the consequences of an aging population are, and then we'll look at a model answer. So on the pyramid on the right, if you've never seen a population pyramid before, then go and look at the National 5 lessons on my website for population pyramids, and they'll give you everything you need to know, including a basic grounding in this topic, aging populations. I'm assuming you've seen these before. You can see that this pyramid has two sets of bars on it, so it's slightly more complicated than a normal population pyramid. The coloured bars show the population in 2017 in Japan, and the white bars, which are kind of sit behind the coloured ones, show the population in 1997. And even a very brief glance shows us that 20 years ago, the population of Japan was more youthful. The bars towards the lower age groups are wider, and their working population in the middle was also larger. They had more people of working age able to contribute towards the economy. But what's also noticeable in the last 20 years, the number of elderly people has increased. And the first thing that we really need to just ensure we have an understanding of is we are talking about an aging population. What we mean is a population that is increasingly getting older. Japan's birth rate, the number of babies they're having, is falling. And you can see that expressed in this graph here, which shows since 1960 to 2020, the rate at which their population is growing. And you can see that it has been consistently falling. In around about 2012, it hit this point here, at which point Japan's population is beginning to shrink because they're below that zero line. And that's because they're having so few babies to increase the population. Added to that, Japan's life expectancy is just going up and up and up and up and up. And the average life expectancy in Japan now is in the mid to high 80s. And as a result of that, result of these two things, they have a smaller and smaller youthful population. Therefore, those young people grow into a smaller and smaller working age population. But because all of those people are going to live for a long time, the proportion of people who are living into old age gets larger and larger. And the population pyramid becomes more and more top heavy. This is an up-to-date pyramid of Japan, and you can see that in 2021 they've got a very, very narrow base of their pyramid. I mean, that only 3.6 or 3.8 or whatever percent of the population is between 0 and 4 years old is concerning when compared to the fact that over 7% of the population is between 70 and 74 years old. There are far more people over the age of 65 in Japan than there are in the ages between 0 and 25. And that is of significant concern to Japan. How are they going to have a workforce that can produce all of the things that they need to produce for Japan to develop its economy in the future if they don't have so many young people? And how are they going to provide for this increasingly large number of elderly people and their needs into the future? As a quick reminder, some of you may have just not looked at population pyramids in a while, Population pyramids are dynamic. That means they're moving all the time. And all I'm able to show you here is a snapshot of a population pyramid. But by showing you this graphic, I can try to communicate to you the idea that population pyramids are constantly mobile. Each year, or every 4 years, a new row is added to the bottom of the pyramid as the last 4 years worth of babies are counted up and added to the pyramid. And you can see on this graphic here that from 2000 through to the end of the century, we can predict what's going to happen to the population in Japan. And you can see, generally speaking, the bottom of the pyramid gets narrower and narrower, and the top of the pyramid gets wider and wider. Okay, so what are the consequences of an aging population structure? Well, there are lots of them, and they're varied. I've tried to take case studies from Britain and to keep them relevant and to keep them contextually relevant to yourselves. But I have used some case studies from elsewhere in the world. Remember, case studies are really important to the quality of your answer. The first and most basic comment that we can make is that population of a country where we have a lot of old people is going to have to pay more tax. And that tax needs to be used to pay for elderly care home construction, the training of geriatric nurses, and lots more beside. The provision of flu jabs to elderly people, for example, is a good example. It's a good idea to have a few examples of what that tax is going to need to pay for in order to score your mark. And here you can see a recent update on the situation in Wales. Because we've got more elderly people in the population and we've got fewer working-aged population, this means that often a country needs to attract more migrant workers. If you've done the population unit, you'll know that migrant workers are essential to the economies of many developed countries, and it's very much the case that we need to attract them to us. And they are an essential part of our service economy. And you can see here that the IMF has said that advanced economies such as Britain and Japan risk being overwhelmed by their aging populations, and we need to get more youthful workers into our economy to do work like, as you can see in the picture, fruit picking, which elderly people can't do. Another impact that we'll talk about is that older people are living longer, and they're therefore fitter and active longer, and they don't necessarily want to retire, combined with the fact that the retirement age is increasing. The age at which your state pension kicks in is getting older and older. Now, this has multiple effects. For a start, by raising the retirement age, that means raising the age at which you retire, we reduce the old age dependency ratio. The old age dependency ratio is the number of people in a population who are considered older compared to the rest of the population. And if that number of older people are dependent on the working population to produce tax to pay for their care, then they are dependent on that working population. By raising the retirement age, what you effectively do is you keep those older people in the working population, and you reduce the dependency ratio between elderly dependent and the working aged population. However, there's a flip side to that. By keeping people in employment for longer and by elderly people wanting to remain in employment for longer, this can make it harder for younger people to find employment in certain sectors. And these graphs kind of illustrate that, really. The number of adults over 65 in employment between 1980 and 2018 in Britain has just gone up and up and up. And the employment rate, the percentage of adults aged 65 and over, has similarly followed the same trend. Another fact related to this same idea is that as more and more elderly people continue to work and engage in the economy can become dependent on those older workers because they make up such a large number. And also, if you think about the pyramid of Japan I showed you, the number of younger employees is shrinking. So the economy can become dependent upon elder or older workers. Now, this means that workplaces need to adapt and become more friendly to elderly workers. There's a few ways that that can happen, and I'll illustrate those in a minute. This is an interesting extract I found on a Canadian government report, a very recent Canadian government report talking about these issues. Pause the video and read it for yourself. Focus on these middle bullet points if you want to speed up your revision. But I mentioned that workplaces are going to have to adapt to meet the needs of older workforces with things like shorter working weeks or flexible working hours, or providing means by which we can do our work from home. And of course, there would need to be training available in order to keep the skill level of workforces high. I think this makes for quite sobering reading, actually. And what is affecting Canada here is also affecting Britain, Japan, Germany, Italy, most developed economies. With so much attention being paid to the elderly proportion of the population, we find that youth services can suffer. Schools, youth organisations, etc., can receive less funding because the proportion of the population is more elderly and less young. And you can see here, this is a few years ago now, but it shows the kind of political interest there is in trying to address that and make sure that funding is available for younger sections of society. But of course, the problem is there's only so much money, and we need to make sure that our elderly proportion of our society are cared for, because we're all going to be old sometime. An increasingly large number of aging people also strain your health service. I've mentioned this before in the first picture I showed you, but the funding to the health service will need to increase, is really what I was talking about there. But there's going to be other impacts associated with that. Where you have more old people, you're going to have longer waiting lists as they require treatment for various ailments. And shortages of certain treatments may occur. Now this guy is called Robert, and I would strongly advise you do your own YouTube research on this because it's fascinating. Robert is a caregiver robot. He is, or she, I don't know, it is designed to assist patients to get in and out of bed and to move where they are perhaps not able to move. And he's able to softly pick you up and lay you down. This is an indication of the challenges that Japan as a society, where this technology was developed, face in the number of elderly patients who require that kind of daily care. They just don't have enough younger nursing staff to physically deal with the number of elderly care patients they have. So they've developed robotic solutions such as this. Also, check out Paro, which is a robot seal pup, and Sony's Aibo has got a lot of attention, which is a robotic dog. And these two give a kind of robotic pet therapy. They can remind elderly people when to take medication. They can interact with them and kind of help their emotional well-being by kind of being affectionate, to be honest, as the lives of many elderly people can be lonely ones. And in class, I'll certainly show you lots of examples of this kind of thing. So as you can see, there are challenges for young people with an aging population, and there are challenges for elderly people in an aging population, and there are also challenges for the economy and for employment with an aging population. Here's a wee picture of Aibo, and there's a wee picture of Paro. Now, this is what you would look at in terms of an exam question. What are the possible consequences of the changes in the population structures that you see? Here's 2019. Here's 2049. The comparison you would be hopefully making here is that in 2049, the pyramid for Japan has got more top-heavy. And these are the kinds of things that you could say to get marks. We've talked about the increase of tax contributions needed. We've mentioned migration. We need to encourage a migrant workforce. There can be side effects to that, though, as people, that can raise tension between cultures and ethnic groups. I've mentioned that the retirement age may need to be increased and more services provided for elderly people. There may be a lower unemployment rate in the future, which is good as elderly people stay in employment. However, the younger people may, there may be difficulties in training younger people to get employment in that future jobs market. Health services will struggle, and citizens may increasingly invest in private healthcare, where they've perceived the NHS, for example, to not be able to give the care that they require. More and more people may invest in private healthcare. We've mentioned, of course, that services for young people may suffer, as there are fewer children, therefore there's a little less demand for services such as schools, nursery care, and youth services. And of course, there's an increased strain and cost on healthcare. And that can lead to some services having very long waiting lists, or some services becoming less available, for example, hip replacements or heart medication. There may also be more demands placed on adult children to care for elderly parents in something called the 4-2-1 effect, where increasingly there are fewer and fewer children. So if you are an only child, you are the one, but your two parents are very likely to live into old age, and you will be likely to have a role in supporting them into their retirement. And their parents, your four grandparents, will also live into old age, and it's not unlikely that your taxes that you pay would have to support the care required for two parents and four grandparents. And that's known as the 4-2-1 effect. There is also an increase in robotics either taking over the roles of jobs that people have in the economy as our workforce declines because everyone's getting older, or a robotic role in actual elderly care, as I've demonstrated. So quite a straightforward question, really, but the devil is in the detail, and having the kind of awareness of the specific case studies throughout. I would combine the notes that I've given you on the previous slide, the orange background notes, with this model answer, and see how you can do in your own effort in class. Okay, the next lesson is going to be on younging populations, which will, no surprise to you, be the opposite to an aging population. Oh, that was helpful.